Everything you see playing on this screen right now are animations I've been able to make using Blender's 2D Workspace Grease Pencil. This is also an updated tutorial for beginners on how to navigate and use the Grease Pencil Workspace for 2D animation. So if this is something that you're interested in, go ahead and keep watching because I'm going to start talking about that right now.
So when you first boot up Blender, you land on the splash screen. You can go to your 2D animation workspace from the splash screen by going down here and clicking on 2D animation. Or if you're click happy and you accidentally clicked into a general workspace, you can go up to the File, New, and 2D Animation to load the 2D animation workspace. Alright, now coming into the workspace, there is a lot to look at. So starting out, this right here is your canvas. This is what you're going to draw on basically. You can zoom in and out of your canvas by using the middle mouse scroll button. If you scroll back, you zoom out and you have more room on your canvas. These borders right here indicate where your camera ends. So anything outside these borders, your camera doesn't see. And then, yeah, if you press up, you scroll in. If you press down on the middle mouse button, you'll accidentally do this, and this takes you into the 3D space because Blender is still working in a 3D space even though you've loaded the 2D space workspace. This is okay if you accidentally come here. You can go back to your workspace really easily by just clicking the camera, and then you're back on the camera scene. Say you have data actually there and you go into a 3D space, then you can go and see the data in a 3D space. Moving down here, we have our timeline. This is a grease pencil timeline, so this timeline is going to show all of your animation layers. So anything that you draw and anything that you animate is going to be here in layers, and it's going to be on this timeline. By default, it loads into 250 frames. Your frame count is down here. You have your start frame and you have your end frame. Just by clicking on it, deleting it, and putting in the number of frames you want and then pressing enter, you can change your frames. If you need to zoom into this to see your frames better, it's the same mechanic, just scroll up on the middle mouse button. You can go to the sides with this bar down here, or scroll out in the middle mouse button, shrink it. It's pretty easy to move around that. Down here we have our play buttons, stuff like that. We also have our dope sheet, which I'm not going to get too much into. It's basically where all other data is stored. So say you imported a background image and you have that background image panning. The keyframes for that will be down on this timesheet, not on the grease pencil one. So that is pretty much what this is. This is all other information and animations that's going on in the project. And these are just the ones that you're going to be drawing and animating with the grease pencil. And the grease pencil is just what anything drawn here is called. So any of these, that would just be grease pencil data. That's basically what that is. So in case you didn't load into draw mode, this is a drop down menu that changes the modes, and you need to be in draw mode to draw on the canvas. You might have loaded in object mode, or you might have loaded in edit mode, but just change this to draw mode, and that's how you're going to be able to draw. And then yeah, your pens, pencils, stuff like that, everything you can draw with is this little menu right here. Select which one you like. This menu right here is the type of line that you're going to be using. So solid stroke is pretty much that. It's going to be a solid line. That's what you're going to be drawing your line work and draft work and other stuff with, I imagine. In order to change the brush size, that is going to be your radius menu right here. And then you just put in what you want it to be. Same principles, delete, put in a number, hit enter, and you've changed your brush size. This has pressure sensitivity if you have a tablet that you can trigger on and off, so size by pressure, and it also has strength. I have the strength up to 100. I don't know if it defaultly up to 100, up to whatever this is. I don't know if it defaultly went to max or not. You can also trigger the strength pressure sensitivity with that right there. So defaultly it draws in black. If you want to change the color, you do have this over here. I honestly don't use this at all. I tick this little box up here and then I hit this and this loads the same thing, the same like color select thing, and then you can just select a color and it'll draw on that color. I tend to use this method to change colors a lot more often because I need to see my layers on this side, which is this little button right here. And this is pretty much the same menu that you have on your timesheet here. But if you have a lot of layers going on, this is a lot more useful. And you also need to be in this menu in order to add and remove layers. So if you wanted to add a new layer, say you want to make a draft, you would hit this little plus icon right here, and that'll add a new layer, which is called a GP layer. You can rename that like you'd normally rename anything else. Double click it, type in the name, hit enter. These little menus right here are affected down here as well. So anything you do, so if you click on this one, it is automatically clicked up here as well. This is basically just an extension, but this extension allows you to add and delete layers. This also allows you to move layers up and down in your project if you need to do that. And this menu will not let you add layers, and it won't let you move projects up and down as far as I know. So yeah, this little icon right here is the mask, and this is what you're going to be enabling in order to clip layers to each other. It's not really like digital art though. You can't just clip it and be all like, oh, okay, it's clipped. You have to add a mask, tell it what to clip to. I'll get more into that when I start talking about the tint modifier and stuff like that. You have right here, which is your onion skin. So this will show you, like, it'll show you an onion skin. And then you can turn it off or on. Obviously, if you want to see your layers or hide them, it's a little eye icon. It's like that in most programs. This is just defaultly ticked. I don't really mess with it. It does whatever. And then yeah, if you want to lock layers, you lock layers. So your layer menu is over here. What you see up here is your collections. You can add a new collection with this little thing up here. If you want to link stuff, it's kind of like folders, I guess. But right here, your strokes, that is all of your brush data. So everything that you're going to be animating and drawing is going to go into the stroke menu. So as you can see, these are your lines right here. Anything else that you add will be up here in your collection because this is everything going on in the scene. So if you wanted to add a background image or something, it's going to show up in this collection up here. And this is how you're going to select it to do stuff to it. Moving on, let's go into our fills. So say we have, well, we have an actual connected circle. That's not going to do anything. So we have this on our draft layer and we want to fill it. It's good to keep these separate. We can go to our fill by going here to solid fill and going here to fill. And then remember, we can change our color up here. Let's just color it brown. And then we go over to it and we click on it and it'll fill this object. Even though this is a separate layer than the line art, if I turn off the line art, it will only fill within the closed area. So any closed area that you have, it's going to detect and it's going to fill. And if it's not closed, then it's going to fill everything. So try and keep this in mind when you're setting up your line art, because the more lines that you have going on your canvas, that's the more areas that it's going to close off if they're overlapping when you're trying to fill stuff. If you have your layers turned off, it won't detect those lines. So just make sure that what you're filling doesn't have overlapping lines unless you want it to detect those areas. But yeah, that's how you would very, very quickly actually go across and fill things. So I'm going to just delete everything on here because I don't need any of this data right now. I'm going to hit a new layer, and I'm going to just have a new layer. And this right here is going to be my first keyframe. So anything I draw right here, because this is where the layer was loaded, is going to be a keyframe. If I move this and say 20, and I press down on the canvas, then this loads an entirely different keyframe. So this is how you're going to be setting up your keyframes. You're going to go on your timeline where you want the keyframe to be, and then you're going to draw it. If you want to see behind it, again, that's onion skinning, and that loads a preview. Okay, so left click on the mouse, you get this little box thing, and you select these. Right click, delete keyframes, and that will delete your keyframes. If you need to move them, it's the same thing. Just left click on them and then hold it down and drag them wherever you want them to be. Okay, so you want to import an image as a background. You want to first go into your edit menu, go into your preferences, make sure you're on add-ons, search up here, type in IM. You don't have to type the whole thing, it'll come up in the menu. And you want to make sure that this box right here, the import images as planes, is ticked on. If it's ticked off, then anything that you import will show up in your view while you're working on it, but it won't show up in your final render because it's basically loading as an empty reference. It's not loading as a finished thing. So it's good to keep that in mind, and it's good to enable this add-on before you try to import anything. Now, how you would add a background image, you'd actually go change your mode to object mode, and you'd go over to this menu and hit add. And then from this drop-down menu, you're going to want to go to image, and you're going to want to go to images as planes. And then select wherever you have the image that you want to import. Go ahead and find that. I think mine is in short animation right now. Yes, sky background, and then import images as planes. And that will load this into the scene. If you hold down S after this drops in, if you move your mouse up and down, it allows you to scale. S allows you to scale in and out. So if you click it after you've scaled it, then hit S again. Clicking places it, and S scales it. If you hit G, if you hold down G, then you can move it around wherever you want it to go. Those are just basic Blender keyboard shortcuts. You also have in this side menu what these shortcuts are for. So you have move here, you can manually move, or you have your rotate, you have your scale, you have your transform. So those were just the shortcuts for those things.
This is also just something that I want to throw in here. When you import an image and drop it as a plane, it will import kind of foggy and less saturated like this. What you want to do in order to get it to look like it originally did in your project, especially if you're doing a 2D animation and you don't want it to have this lighting effect on it, you go over to the material tab right here, this specular bar, you just want to turn it all the way off. And that's going to make it look like your image originally was, and it's just going to mesh with the 2D animation a lot better. I just wanted to throw that in there and talk about it really quick because this is something that does happen when you import images as planes, and it does kind of mess up a 2D animation a bit. So that's a quick fix on that, and that is the end of this. Back to the original video.
Alright, so you have your background image, and you want your background image to do a simple pan or some other sort of animation. Then you want to bring up this sheet down here. Try and click on this. Okay. Now you want to tick this little box right here, the auto keying, and make sure that this is on, because as soon as you move this object, it's going to insert it as a keyframe. And then whatever you do to it after that, it's going to record the action. So I'm going to click here. I'm going to move it just a little bit so it can register as a keyframe. And now we have our first frame. And this is all of the data from that. I'm not going to go too complex into this, but this basically just records its location transforms and stuff like that. So say I wanted this to pan a little bit. I want it to end here, so I'm going to drag it to 60. I'm going to go back to this, and I'm going to just move it over like this, and then let go of it. As soon as I let go of it, it's registered as a keyframe. So yeah, if you go back to frame 1 and you press play now, that action is going to be recorded, and that's how you would do a simple pan of something. And again, since this object is not a stroke, it's going to be on this timeline instead of the grease pencil timeline. Now, right now, you're not selected on your stroke, so that's why all of your layers and stuff went away, because up here you're selected on your sky. So you need to go back down to stroke to bring back the view for all of your layers and stuff, because this menu is only showing grease pencil stuff, so whenever you move away from it, it no longer shows that. Just to point that out real quick. Okay, so that's how you would bring in a background. I'm going to go back to draw mode now, and I'm going to go a little bit over or how to auto between, I mean. So in draw mode, I'm going to draw, just say, a little thing like that. And then say I want that thing to move. So this is going to be my other frame, and I want this to be my next frame. Now, in order to in between an action in Blender, you need to be in between areas that you want to tween. And then you go here and you go to edit mode, interpolate, and this is going to be your tweening. You're going to hit sequence, and it's going to automatically move this and create keyframes for you. Now, this gets tricky because it doesn't handle complex strokes very well. So if you have something simple like this, it's not going to have a problem. If you started your first stroke line in the same place, so you started drawing here and went this way, and then your second stroke you started drawing here and went this way, this is simple enough data for it to understand what's happening and for it to move it correctly. Okay, if you want to get rid of the in-betweens, just remove breakdowns. It takes away all of them. I'm going to delete this, and I'm going to draw a different thing that starts at a different point and is slightly more complex to try and illustrate what happens. Let's draw some hair, because that tends to mess it up pretty quickly. Alright, new keyframe. Okay, so that's a lot for it to keep track of, right? Interpolate sequence. Alright, now this is what I was trying to get to happen. If you have too much data going on at once, it's going to get really confused and do stuff like that. So just make sure when you're moving things, that the things that you're moving are on their own layers. So if you have a mouth, if you have an entire face turn, it's better if you're going to be using the interpolate to have the mouth moving on its own layer, the nose moving on its own layer, eyes moving on their own layer, stuff like that. So you don't have a lot of funky stuff going on when you're trying to interpolate a really complex or detailed thing that has a lot of lines going on. To avoid this happening, just make sure that you have your layers separated well. Okay. A way to do this if you have a lot going on and you don't want to separate it by layers is, instead of drawing a new keyframe, if I create the other keyframe by going into edit mode and selecting, and then remember G lets you move things around. If I select them, these are transforms, and transform them manually, then it will keep track of the data and it won't break up all weird like that. If you want to select more than one thing, also, I saw this left out of a few videos. You select it and then hold shift and then select with shift down. Just keep selecting the things that you want to move, and that's how you multi-select things. Oops. This actually takes a lot more time than I thought it would. I'm going to rotate this and G to move it. Okay, so I have these moved, and this keyframe, remember, was created from moving these keyframes around. So I'm going to Interpolate Sequence. These frames are only 20, so I'm going to change my 20 count to just so you can see better. And by moving them manually like that, it keeps track of it without getting all wonky and twisting into itself and stuff like that. So if you do work with a lot of different lines and a lot of different stuff going on at once, and you want to use this Interpolate Sequence method, your best bet to get it to not warp in and out of itself all crazy when you have a lot of lines going on and you don't want to use different layers is to just go into edit mode and make your new layers by clicking on the frame you want to start on and then selecting your old lines and dragging them over and positioning them, because that better tells it what you're trying to do and it doesn't get really confused that way. So I wanted to go over that a bit more in depth because this was an area that took a bit for me to really wrap my head around. And some people were doing this and getting these smooth, simple animations, and then when I tried to do it, it went all crazy because I just had too much going on. Something else about the Interpolate sequence, it will automatically load its type as linear. If you click on this menu, you have custom and you have all of these different things. So you can add like bounce mechanics to stuff and stuff like that. That's something I encourage you to look up more yourself to try and understand. I'm not going to go in depth about these. In most cases, linear works fine for just simple tweening in and out of keyframes. If you need to change the color of anything that you've done, say you're really far in a project, but like, oh, you don't like the line color or something, then you can very easily do this by going over to this menu over here and clicking on modifiers. So add a modifier. If you go over to color and you go to tints, then it'll automatically apply a modifier, well, to pretty much everything that's going on. So you'd want to go over to your layer and clip it to the layer that you want it to affect. That apparently wasn't the layer. So yes, this layer. Yes. So make sure that you clip it to the layer you want it to affect. The mode is stroke and fill, and you adjust your color here. Okay, I apparently had this clipped to the wrong layer. Or wrong layer selected, whatever. But yeah, and this will change the color of your entire project. So all of the keyframes and everything else, that's how you change the color of a major area. Anything pretty much that was made with that layer will change using a tint modifier. If you want to delete it, it's just this little X right here. You can delete it, easy peasy. If you are creating keyframes by editing your previous keyframe for the interpolation, you can also, instead of edit mode, go into sculpt mode. And what Sculpt Mode does is it allows you to interact with the lines a lot differently. If you look at these are your sculpt menus, and you can grab them and you can push them, so it becomes a lot easier to warp them over um, a draft shape. And this isn't something I demonstrated using the edit mode because I just kind of moved them and dragged them over. But this mode, the sculpt mode, will allow you to better warp them into place over your draft. So I just wanted to quickly add that in and show off this mode and this feature if you're going to be using the edit mode for the interpolation. There was another thing that I also wanted to add in that I forgot about, and that is how to create different um, strokes. So, for example, you have your grease pencil timeline here, and say you have one character with a million layers, fully animated, mapped out, and you want to add another character, but you don't want to have to go through all of these layers to find the new character's layers and start working on them. That's where creating a new collection comes in. So if you create a new collection and you go onto this collection and you go into object mode, you can add another grease pencil collection that you can work with. So you can separate your characters or other animated things that are going on if you have a lot of layers going on. Go ahead and just add a blank, and now you have another stroke to start working with. Remember that your layers are on this green icon, and it's a blank, so it doesn't have the line and the fill that the original stroke default grease layer came up with, so you're going to have to just create a new layer to start putting data onto this. And remember that this timesheet will only show information for the grease pencil stuff that you are on. So right now you're on this new grease pencil, which would in theory be your second character or third character or something else in the background moving, but you want to go back to your first character and work on them more, you'd have to go up into this menu and go into your original stroke and fills to load up this. So I just wanted to throw that out there as well, because that is another way to kind of keep your workspace organized and to keep something that has a lot of layers, if you have multiple characters that have multiple layers, more cleanly separated so you could more easily work on them. This is how you're going to clip layers to each other. So say you wanted to put shadow on this, but you only wanted it to affect the skin tone. You're going to want to use masks for that. So you're going to create a new layer and turn this little icon right here mask layer. Alright, so this is the layer that's going to have your shadow, and you want it to be clipped to your skin tone, which is what your fills is. So make sure you have mask selected and then go down to your mask menu, and you're going to hit the little plus icon and pick the group that you want it to be clipped to, and I want it to be clipped to the fills. So now anything that I draw on this layer um, should be clipped to the skin layer. I'm going to go to the solid fill brush and use this because I didn't go over this very much in that video as well either. So I wanted to show off what I was talking about with adding shadows and stuff quickly with the solid fill brush. So the solid fill brush goes around and we'll just quickly add things like that.
Lastly, this is just going to be a couple other things that I left out of the original video, but that I want to go over now that I've messed with the program a lot more. You have a stroke stabilization here in the stroke menu that you can turn on. This is going to smooth out your lines a lot more if you need to have this on. Keep in mind, using it does create a bit of a lag though. So I normally, if I use it, only have it at around 10 because otherwise it just draws way too slowly for me. But this is going to stabilize your strokes. I kind of hope that they update this in the future because as it is, it's still let's just say I don't have the patience to really put up with it most of the time. But if you're cool with drawing really slowly, then it's probably going to give you a lot better line art than what you would originally be doing. Secondly, I want to talk about modifiers and effects a bit more. So this modifier I have used a lot. It is the noise modifier. And all you have to do is hit noise, go ahead and load it, and then it will be on your thing. As soon as it's on there and you press play, you'll see that it's doing this kind of like crazy storybook animation effect. I like this a lot and I use it a lot. And then you can just mess with these menus and it'll change pretty much what it's doing. This also, a lot of the modifiers have this influence tab, which will let you affect a single layer. So if you have multiple layers and you only want one of them to be all wiggly, go ahead and choose your layer here. Right now I only have the fills layer, so I can't choose any other layers. But you just tell it to influence that layer only, and it would do just that. If you want to get rid of the modifier, then it's X. There are other modifiers. Array modifier, pretty self-explanatory. I'm pretty sure you can right-click Insert Keyframe. There you go. You have an array effect that is building on itself. All I did there was insert the keyframe. On the first keyframe, I put it to the number I wanted to have, which was 1. On the second keyframe, I put it to the max number I wanted to have at this point in the timeline, and it was 8. So remember that you can right-click and insert a keyframe on most menus, and it'll have animation effects. Again, modifiers have influencer tabs, which are great. You have your thickness. If you will need to adjust the thickness of your line art later down in your project, you can use a thickness modifier. So I use the solid fill brush to quickly color this. And a note about that, if you can, try and use this or the fill brush itself to color in areas. Try not to use the draw pen to color in areas, because it's going to be a lot easier to keep these from breaking apart if you are sculpting and editing them if they're painted with these as opposed to painted with the brush. Because when you paint them with the brush, they create a lot more different, smaller chunks of data to keep track of, and this is going to make it break apart a lot easier, and it's just harder to deal with. So try and just keep them as solid as you can when you're trying to color. That's what I'm getting at. Anyway, I'm going to go over a few effects now that I think are pretty cool and that I have used a lot. So effects, unlike modifiers, tend to not have areas that they can specifically influence or layers that they can specifically influence. So if your project has something like a blurred foreground, you're going to want to use the blur effect to apply the blur, and you're going to want to have your foreground on a separate grease pencil thing altogether. So keep this in mind, because if you have all of your stuff, your foreground, your background, your characters on one grease pencil, and you try to blur it, it's going to blur everything that's on that grease pencil. All of these effects are like that as far as I know. If you apply a glow to part of your grease pencil, you can't apply it to one layer. It's going to apply it to everything in that grease pencil group. Same with a rim light, etc., etc. So keep that in mind when you are using effects. Now this I wanted to apply a rim light to. As I said, it's going to apply to everything on this layer, and you're going to be able to move it around using this. You can also change the mode that you want it to be with this drop down here and the color up here. This will give your character and your drawing a very quick rim around all of it. And it's great. Also works the same way for shadows. You can have shadows on your character the very same way. If you want to add a blur effect, this is what I was talking about. This is how you're going to blur parts of your animation. And then you have your menus over here on how much to affect it. The size is pretty much going to be the strength of the blur that you're going to be changing. And again, these are things that you can right click and animate. So if you want them to get blurrier, same way that I showed you before, insert a keyframe by right clicking, click on your keyframe, have it set to what you want it to start out at, click on your final keyframe and have it set to as blurred as you want it to get, and it will animate in a blur that gradually gets stronger. Last effect I want to go over is the glow. I've used this one a lot too. I really like it. In order for glows to really look good in Blender, you do need to have in your render tab, which is this little camera up here, the bloom on, or it's not going to look right. So make sure that you have the bloom ticked on in your render tab. You're going to try to apply glows to anything in your scene. Your world properties here are the color of your background. So you can change this. Obviously, the lower it is, the more the glow is going to stand out. So if you need to do that, keep that in mind. But yes, and then you have your intensity, your threshold, all of these things that you can affect. You have blend mode on how you want them to be affected. You have your opacity. You have your size. You have glow under, if you want it to only glow around the object. Things like that. That's how you would use them. The final kind of frustrating thing that I've learned using Blender is if you want to have an object rotating or moving, it's a lot easier instead of selecting the grease pencil and rotating it, because for some reason this will cause it to spin out of control on the axis. Something with the programming, I don't know. I guess because it doesn't have a proper anchor point or something. Anyway, you want to go into object mode. For the most part, you're going to want to add an empty. For most of the things, I use an empty cube because it's easier to see than using a mesh circle or something, what direction it's facing. But you want to take this empty if you want to have something rotate. You want to go down here. You want to make sure that this is ticked on. You want to rotate a little bit, a register keyframe. And then you want it to meet the end. Rotate it as many times as you want it to rotate in the animation. Create your next keyframe. Make sure that that is animating. Then go ahead and tick this off so you don't accidentally change it. And what you want to do with your grease pencil now is go to your stroke and go to the Layers tab and your Relations tab. From your Relations tab, you want to parent this grease pencil object to this empty. Now when you play back the animation, the grease pencil is going to be following that animation. It's going to look better if it started at the first frame, but whatever. But that's how you would rotate something. You can also move this in like the center so it isn't on the outside of it and rotating weird, and it's just rotating in the center. I just set this example up poorly because I did it quickly. But that's how you would go about rotating objects and moving them around if you want to get those things to happen. Alright, that's everything that I can think of. Lastly, an error message that I ran into during interpolation. If you get an error message when you're trying to interpolate something and it says basically that it can't interpolate it because there's nothing selected, it's probably because you have your marker on a keyframe. All you have to do is move your marker on your timeline in between your keyframes and then try to interpolate again, and most likely it'll interpolate for you. Because I had my marker on my keyframe, I kept getting this error for a very long time and finding a solution to this problem because I was new to Blender and didn't know what was wrong with it all of a sudden. And there wasn't anything that mentioned that it isn't going to do anything that I had seen if it was on top of the keyframe. It took me a very long time to find a solution to this, basically. So I wanted to point this out so people don't make the same stupid mistake and get confused about how to fix it because there's barely anything on it, because I guess nobody makes this mistake except for me. So yeah, that's about it for this Blender tutorial. Um, I also forgot the camera. If you want to do camera animations, if you want to have cameras pan up or down or zoom in, the camera itself is an object. So just like anything else, you would need to have the record on, and you would need to affect the object properties down here, and you would need to create a keyframe, drag it down the timeline to where you want it to be, edit where you want it to be, and that's how you would do camera animations. Same with zooms and anything like that. Just the camera is an object, so it's going to be on your dope sheet, not your grease pencil. You can also load in a reference image, which isn't going to show up in your final render. If you don't want to import an image as an empty, you can also import a reference image through the camera through one of these menus. Background images. And then add image, and it'll give you a image to work with or trace over that you want to start your project with, but it isn't going to show up in the final thing. I don't like doing this because it kind of gets in the way of the camera I'm using, and I don't like adding other cameras unless I absolutely need to. But it is an option if that's something you wanted to do. Okay, this is the official end of this video. Thank you if you stuck around this long, and hopefully you learned something. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to drop them in the comment box below. And hopefully this helped you with the basics on how to use this program if you're interested in using it for 2D animation. I myself, after looking into multiple programs, looking into Clip Studio's workspace since I have Clip Studio and use it a lot for comics, and looking into Adobe Animate, I just found that Blender had better tweening and interpolation, and the fact that you can use 3D with it just kind of it trumped all of the other programs for me, and I've just been enjoying it a lot more and learning it a lot more, and I don't know, I think it's already pretty good, but they always constantly update Blender, and I think it's probably going to be really amazing in the future, so I'm pretty excited for that. Alright, later for real.